All right, guys, let's start. As you know, this meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to public internet. With that, let's start the meeting. I have a few items that I wanted to talk about, and now I saw that Sudesh has also joined. I would like to actually hear some updates about resource bin packing that Sudesh used to work on. Sudesh, if you want to go ahead and talk about that, you feel free to do so. Otherwise, I can go over some of the items that I have, and then we can get back to that.
Yeah, for sure. So the last time I had checked, I had it working in my PR, but there were some changes made to the schedule after that. So I just had to solve some code conflicts. And I think someone got back to me to create a cap, but before that, I had created a Google Drive document, which I shared with the issue,
Yeah.
which has like the discussions about the design detail with Klaus, like what he was thinking and all. But I think the last thing that was on the PR was Klaus had to get back to me on something, and that did not happen. So I was just waiting on his review.
Oh, yeah. So sounds good. So the thing is that recent development workflow has changed slightly. Basically, the idea is that we need to have all these caps ready and merged before our feature freeze, which usually happens about a month or so earlier than the code freeze. So feature freeze for 1.14 has already passed. It was, I don't know, it was end of January or so, I believe. And the code freeze is basically now. So I would say it's too late for this feature to go into 1.14, but we should definitely work on it for 1.15. And then I don't know if Klaus can provide reviews. I think he can. In the case that he cannot provide reviews, I'll be happy to help. And we also have a few other folks like Wei is here. You can have Jonathan is here. You can have Leon and Wang are all here. Any of us can help review your PR. But please make sure that you follow the workflow. This is something that we cannot do anything about. It's sort of like a new workflow in all Kubernetes repositories. So we need to have a cap and we need to get it merged before the feature freeze.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that for sure.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let me just pull up my meeting notes. Yeah, so as you know, code freeze is here. We can no longer have any new features, but if there are bugs to be fixed, we can still get those in during the code freeze. Please make sure that all your PRs hopefully are already merged. I know that there are some that you are still working on, but I believe most of the other stuff that we wanted to have in 1.14 are already there. There was a flakiness in one of the tests. I actually filed an issue for it. I didn't actually add it here. I should have, but anyhow, so there is a flakiness. I filed a help wanted issue for that. If any of you folks have the cycles to take a look, I would appreciate it. Way has a cap for a new feature for spreading pods evenly in a topology domain. Actually, I wanted to discuss that for a few minutes because I felt like that there was a little bit of disagreement about how to approach that problem. I didn't read your further comments after I left some comments on your PR, but one of the issues is that in your PR for the cap, you say that we should add this even distribution feature to the existing affinity and anti-affinity, including node affinity and anti-affinity. I was not so convinced. I didn't see any reason why we should do that. Do you have any strong reasons? Why shouldn't we have it like a separate independent component?
Yeah, two major thoughts on this. So that was my actually the very beginning thinking as well. But later on, I think that it is actually almost identical with current API spec, which is you mentioned that pod affinity, label selector, the namespace, topology key, right? That means we have to kind of introduce almost the same API spec on top of pod.spec rather than reuse the current pod.spec affinity. So in user's perspective, maybe they will question why almost the same API spec was introduced, and also internally we have to kind of maintain two identical data structures, which means when a pod get updated, we have to additional update the additional data structure, right? To update that to make it up to date to efficiently make predicate decisions whether it's can be evenly spreaded or not. So this is my
I don't see why do we need another data structure for that?
Because right now in predicate, for example, in predicate metadata, right? When we produce that cache, we use sort of topology pair map to store some kind of information to efficiently to tell us whether this pod can be a match or not match, right? But actually for even pod spreading, it's actually also we should check whether it's a match or not match, and it's almost the same. Almost the same logic as what pod affinity and did. It's kind of pod to pod match, right? If
Right.
they are if they are belongs to the same group of pods, then we calculate the number. We calculate whether they match or not match. Then we do additional operations. So I would expect that kind of duplicated logic will exist in the code base.
To an extent, some amount of duplication of logic could happen, but implementation is sort of like separate than the API. I would say if we need an extra structure, we may still need that extra structure regardless of how the API is designed. Isn't that right? I mean, if this feature is under existing affinity, we will still have to have like another structure for example, counting the number of.
Yeah, sort of additional, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, but also our metadata for all these predicates and priority functions are sort of like global. By that I mean there is one metadata which we pass along to all the predicates. It's not like every predicate builds its own metadata, or every priority function builds its own metadata. So in that sense, addition of another predicate or priority function does not require addition of a new set of metadata. So that's my thinking. That's one thing. The other thing is that our plan for affinity and anti-affinity, particularly for anti-affinity, is that we want to make it limited to node only, right? So in the near future, it's going to be different. So for anti-affinity, our plan is basically to remove topology key. So by default, it's going to be only node. And in that case, it may not fit well with this idea of having distribution in an arbitrary topology domain. Having that under.
That is the second concern for me. So my original plan is to provide this feature on all three functions we provided: node affinity, pod affinity, and pod anti-affinity, so that we can resolve some scenario like we do rolling upgrade on a deployment which has the pod anti-affinity, right? Because it's a rolling upgrade, so additional replacement pod should be launched. But at that time, maybe the system has additional capacity on landing the additional placement pod, so that will fail. That it will be kind of deadlock on that kind of situation. So, but if we don't want to provide even spreading on pod anti-affinity, then that kind of issue still exists.
I mean, anti-affinity or like even distribution of pods in a topology domain is some sort of anti-affinity anyways. So it's not exactly anti-affinity in the sense that if there is one pod in a topology domain, we are not going to put another pod there. But in a way, it's anti-affinity, which basically achieves even distribution of pods. In fact,
go
ahead.
Yeah, for pod anti-affinity, actually the semantics change a little bit. It actually gives the user some toleration to some extent, so that more than one pod can be landed onto the node. Yeah, that is the real semantics of pod spreading. I can explain this way, right? Actually, it violates the semantics of original definition of pod anti-affinity.
Correct. Exactly. So this is the difference between the new API versus the existing one. Basically, that the new one allows more than one pod per topology domain, depending on the number of total replicas that you have. Anyway, so yeah, well, we can discuss this further in the document, but I feel like it's not necessary to have this feature under the existing affinity and anti-affinity.
Basically,
it could become confusing for users too, right? So, like adding this new extra feature to the existing affinity and anti-affinity API could be confusing.
Yeah, as a summary, my concern on this is, first one is to kind of user have to accept a new API spec which looks like the same as current pod affinity and the other node affinity. If users are good at this, I think the internal duplication logic or something is a minor factor.
Right, I agree.
Yeah,
I think. Sorry, I think that the API Council, not API Council, SIG API, we have people we could go to sort of get feedback on API design. Jordan Liggett and the architecture. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, this is my first concern. If we can get more API machine learning experts comment on that, that would be good. A second concern is that if we go that way, put it on the standalone feature starting, we cannot support the I would say the refined semantics on pod anti-affinity. So we lose that kind of feature on pod affinity. If users are good, satisfied, are okay with that, I have no question on that.
Yeah. Yes, that's a fair point. Another thing to keep in mind is that putting something like even distribution under node, under node affinity, or under interpod affinity, not anti-affinity, just interpod affinity, can be confusing, right? So you have node affinity to certain nodes, and then you also provide even distribution, which is basically something like anti-affinity, not really affinity. So it's combining these two together becomes a little bit confusing. So anyway, we can actually talk about the API design with the API folks and get their opinion about this.
Sure.
Okay. There is another proposal by Leon, actually. Leon, you have a proposal for adding greater than or less than operators for interpod affinity, right? So we have like two similar things for two different things, but this one is for interpod affinity, right? And then I commented on your document, basically saying that this could be a little bit confusing for anti-affinity, because anti-affinity is match any. And if it is match any, then when you provide both operators to specify a range, you don't get a range. You actually will end up matching against almost all the pods, not almost all the pods which have that label. For example, if you can see my whiteboard here. So if you have, let's say, a label, two affinity rules or anti-affinity rules. So let's say anti-affinity, larger. Okay, I can try. Okay. Is it visible now? So, okay, so you have anti-affinity, and then first term, let's say you say foo less than, I don't know, 20, and then second term, foo larger than 10, right? So you think you are creating a rule that matches pods whose foo label is between 10 and 20, but this is actually not what is going to happen. It's going to match pretty much all the pods which have a foo label, because in anti-affinity, this is match any. So if a pod matches the first rule, this is considered a match. So any label whose foo is less than 20, including foo equals to 5 or 0 or minus 10, is going to match this. Therefore, we're going to have anti-affinity to this. And the same thing is for greater than 10. So anything larger than 10, including foo equals to 100, is going to match against this. And your pod is going to end up having anti-affinity to those pods which have a label equal to foo 100, for example. All right, so this is a problem. And this can be even further confusing for users, because this does not apply to affinity, because affinity is match all, anti-affinity is match any, right? So if you have the same rules in affinity, it's going to work fine. Affinity, then you're going to get a range. So for that reason, I was thinking that maybe instead of introducing greater than and less than, we can actually introduce a range operator that works similarly for both cases. So you can, for example, have a range that says range is, so the operator is range, then it takes two when the arguments can be like a set that takes two strings, or you can ignore the rest if there is more than two, or you can throw an error if there are more than two. It basically specifies the range. That should probably work better, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I don't know if there are any particular use cases that you want to have like only larger than or only less than operators.
I have some different opinion on this. So basically, Bobby, the example you raised is that we have different terms, and for this kind of example, yes, that matches all actually, because you know the opposite, and you put the whole unit set of all the stuff, right? But actually, for this, if user wants to go with anti-affinity and to put and to full into a range, actually they should put the two conditions inside the same term. Yeah, put it into the match expression rather than put into the different term. Different term will be confusing and will cause unexpected behavior. But if they put into the same term, you
cannot have multiple operators in the same term, right?
Yeah, for the same term, it's okay, because the result of one term, right, will be the any.
Okay.
Yes.
No, but my question is that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with the way said. When they under the match expression, they are in its end.
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand. What you mean?
Yeah, there are several terms in that we can say that when the label is an one label selector match expression. their relationship is end.
The relationship is n.
So
So basically, we can put it like this. For any term, no matter what's inside the logic is, it will be a result, right? We actually calculate the result of individual term in a all way or in any way. So we don't care too much about inside the term, right? So if the semantics of the term is reasonable, we can go proceed with that, right? But if the result, like the example, Bobby, you raised, the matching, so the matching result of the different terms actually doesn't make really sense, but it's still valid. So we can coach the users that if they want to use potato range pod anti-affinity, they shouldn't do it that way because different terms will kind of calculate in any logic.
Yeah.
Sure, but can we have multiple operators in a single term? I am not
Yeah,
very
you can.
fluent in terms of our API, but so we can have multiple operators in the same term.
We can have multiple. Yeah, it's called match expressions.
Okay, so how do you specify the two operators in match expression then?
I think in his, let me give that. Is this, let me put in the chat. Yeah, sort of like this.
So yeah, the label selector doesn't
just one
of all the expressions, and each affinity term has a label selector.
Yeah. So each label selector, we usually call it a term.
Yeah, the affinity term or anti-affinity.
Yeah. They're the same, of the same data structure. And also I saw some user raise the issues, says that you are not following the all or any semantics your document, and I explained to them that you should put it into the match expressions. I can show you that issue user.
I see. Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, thank you for explaining it. So I see. So we can, in the same label selector, we can have multiple expressions. We can have multiple operators. Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, this makes sense. Actually, this solves the problem. So never mind about introducing the range operator or anything. I guess this is fine. Thank you for clarifying.
But we do need to kind of let our users know because it's somewhat confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. We should definitely document this very well. Otherwise, many users will get confused. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, as long as we can provide a mechanism. It's not ideal because we are introducing some API that is easy to get wrong, and that's generally bad practice. But I mean, we should definitely document this very well. Hopefully, users will follow. This particular problem does not apply to affinity. Affinity will be fine in basically in both cases. Affinity will be the same, but for anti-affinity, this is going to cause some confusion for users. I don't know. We can all think about possible ways of improving the situation. If there is any better ideas, we'll definitely welcome those. All right. So, and that's that. Oh, and last thing, Wei, I went over your recent PR for supporting multiple pod in affinity, multiple pod matching in affinity. Thanks for the PR. Actually, it has changed quite a bit since last time I reviewed it. So you made a lot of changes to that. My biggest concern currently, at least at this point, is the fact that we are introducing a whole new structure, which could be actually a larger structure in the cache. And this structure is going to get created and maintained. Basically, by maintained, I mean we have event handlers to add and remove nodes as you're added to the cluster to this structure. And it could increase memory footprint of the scheduler, even in the clusters that never use affinity or anti-affinity, right?
Yeah, this is a major point. I will check. I will check later. I also actually I wrote the code in the first version actually half a year ago. So I also need some time to recall this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. It has been a while. Sorry about the delay. So anyhow, I want basically the main question here about this PR is that if we built this sort of structure that you have created as a part of metadata creation, is it going to slow us down much? If that's the case, then we can think about alternatives. If it's not too bad, then maybe we should keep it as a part of metadata creation or metadata production instead of just keeping it all the time in the scheduler cache.
Yeah, in the last round of the performance testing, it doesn't have some significant overhead. But I will do another round of testing on performance.
Yeah, thank you.
And also think about the case that if the part affinity is not used, we don't bring additional overhead and memory footprint.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
All right, these are all the stuff. I guess I used the whole time of the meeting, but please go ahead and share your comments or questions if you have other stuff to share with us. No, nothing going once, twice. All right, thank you guys, and have a great weekend. We are not still there, but soon we will get there. And I'm not going to see you guys until next week. You all have a great weekend, and hopefully I'll see some of you folks next week. Bye.
Bye.